Okay, now we're going to talk about color. What we've been working with, for the most part, has been what we would call invented color. And when we use a color scheme, when we choose a color scheme like a complementary pair or a split complementary or analogous or all primaries or however, any kind of a premeditated color plan or color scheme is generally going to be considered invented color because we're not painting the objects as we see them. We're translating the information about value, how light or dark something is, and we're turning that into, we're plugging that into the colors that we've chosen. So you worked on that with your most recent still life. You took these photos of objects that had their own colors, but then I asked you to choose a color scheme and paint them. And the color scheme you chose dictated how you dealt with that object. So now, and that's a really good tool. That's still my preferred method of how I approach my paintings. I prefer invented color because I have the ability to control and manipulate the reality within the painting in a way that I prefer over what we call local color. So local color is the color you see. Here's a little sculpture thingy I made. Okay. Of my smoker. And, you know, this little object, the local colors would be a kind of muted yellow, sort of a yellow ochre, almost brown, this muted red. You know, I would think that's probably like a alizarin crimson mixed with just a tiniest bit of viridian green. Here's a viridian green with white and probably some, that might even be yellow ochre in there, you know, a cerulean blue with white. So those are local colors. Okay, that's the actual colors that this object has. This object here, the local color is yellow, you know, and we would still be able to create depth by painting the actual colors that we see. And one of the things that's so interesting and what a great learning experience by painting local color is that you start to realize, the more you really look at these objects, you start to realize that the color of an object, the color that you might call something, like I would say this is yellow, is not the whole truth. There are other colors in this yellow sculpture. So depending on the light source, the temperature of the light that's coming in, if it's sunlight, it's going to be a much more orange yellow light. I happen to be under white balanced lights that I put in my studio so that I can see colors as clearly as possible. So this is a totally neutral, it's not yellow, it's not blue, it's the whitest white light I can get. And let's see. So check out the difference here in the yellow that you see here versus the yellow you see here. The value changes, yes. But on top of that, in addition to the value change, it actually gets much cooler here. So this yellow has more green in it than this yellow does. Do you see that? It's much more green. It would be nice to be able to give you a formula or to say, if your object is this color, then, you know, the core shadow is going to be this color or something. And it's just not how it works. There's far too many variables to give you an easy out like that. You really have to hone your powers of observation and start to connect what you see to the paints that you have access to. It requires a lot of patience. It requires so much practice. You got to do it over and over again. I mean, I remember in undergrad spending years and years working on understanding local color because it is such a complicated thing. You're going to start to see patterns emerge when you start looking for these things. An example might be if you have a strong red light. This is actually an example that we do with students when we're in person. It's really fun and sort of surprising, but we'll set up a still life and I'll get a red light bulb and I'll put that in. And so I've got this red light shining on a white object. Now the object looks red. It casts a shadow on let's say a white tabletop. The cast shadow is green. It's not red. So red and green are complementary colors. So sometimes that happens where the light source will dictate the color of a shadow. Usually a complementary pair, but that's only if your objects are neutral, like white or black, or maybe a gray. But if your object has a color of its own, that's going to change things too. So I might have a red light shining on something, but if it's shining on my lemon, then who knows? You know, especially if my tabletop is green, who knows what color my shadow's going to be? There are far too many variables to say this is what will happen or this is what will happen. It requires a lot of individual observation of every single situation. It's totally subjective. So the skill here is in learning how to take the time to see these things. We'll take a look at my still life, and I'm just going to point out a couple of things as an example. This is not what your still life will be. You won't be able to apply what I'm learning from my still life to yours. The only thing you'll be able to apply is the technique of how to look at these things. So what I want you to do before you get to painting is to make a small sketch, wherever, in a sketchbook, on a piece of paper, whatever. Make a small sketch of your still life, but make it big enough that you can actually write inside of it. So just do a contour line drawing, very basic. It doesn't even, the composition doesn't need to look right. The scale of things could be a little off. The key is I want you to, with words, label the colors that you see. So when you're looking at your photo, zoom in on it, try to isolate the color from what's around it if you can. A great way to do that is to take a sheet of copy paper, whatever, and cut a small square out of it. Okay, yes, so I want you to do this. We need to take a piece of paper and cut a hole in it, a little square like this. And presumably you'll have your phone, you'll have your object. That looks cool. You're gonna have your object, your still life on your phone. You're gonna cut a tiny square or a tiny circle in a piece of paper and pull up your still life. You'll zoom in. I'm going to use my iPad to show you exactly what I mean. Okay, I've got my still life here. I want to know what this green is like when the light hits it. So I'm going to choose the area that has that's facing the direction of my light source. I'm going to zoom in on that area. I'm not entirely sure what is happening in this space, excuse me, because of the white going on around it, this kind of yellowy stuff happening. So I'm going to isolate as best I can, isolate that green. Try to get a sense for it. Let's take a look at this yellow. That's probably a little bit more orange than I thought it was. Let's look at the ground. I want to examine this and compare it to this. Okay, that feels like a really neutral gray to me. Let's compare it to this up here, which feels much more cool. Yeah, just as I expected, but that's nice to know. I want to be able to isolate colors like that because they are going to appear different when they're next to another color. So that's an excellent tool. Then what I want you to do, you've done that, you're looking at your object, you've got a little drawing that you've made of your still life, and I want you to actually, with words, label the major color changes that you see. So like in my still life, let's say this is my drawing. Okay, obviously it's not the drawing itself, but let's pretend this is my drawing. I would come in here and I would label this yellow. I might even label it primary yellow. And then I would come in here to these areas that are a little bit more orange, and I would label it yellow-orange. I would come into this area that's quite a bit darker, and I would try to label it. I would call it dark yellow-orange. I might even call it a yellow-brown, something like that. Just whatever. You don't have to use the words of the paint, the names of the paint. Just use whatever way is going to help you keep track of what's happening with color, okay? Go through your object and wherever there's major stuff that you really want to keep track of, write the names of the colors down that you see. Then the last thing you're going to do is try to paint it. And this is complicated. It's difficult stuff. You're taking about 5 or 6 skills that you've learned just over the last few weeks and adding in a whole new skill to practice. So be kind to yourself. Go slow. This is not an assignment you can do in a day. This is a week-long assignment, and you're probably going to need to work on it most days this week. So give yourself the space and time, and do yourself the favor. If you enjoy art, give yourself that time to really dig into this and enjoy it, because this now is the very beginning of your journey as a lifelong artist.